So in this presentation, I'm going to focus on urban pest control and the removal of pests from spaces of art. I'm interested in exploring traps as places or plot holes that tell stories of how particular ways of seeing and perceiving the world open up, shift, and take form. Successful trapping relies upon an embodied and empathic engagement with animal worlds and a sensitive attunement to place. Trappers have methods and tools which gain them access to hard-to-reach perspectives. The people I know who work in pest control are endlessly researching the sensory worlds, behaviours, and experiences of the animals which they're tasked to trap. So I've come to think of trapping as its own kind of beyond human anthropology, an anthropology of other animals. This presentation focuses on themes of attention, visibility within and around spaces of art that are matters of concern for both artists and for pest control trappers. I'm working from a close reading of Anselm Franke's essay, The Third House from 2016, and his analysis of the structural conditions that isolate and quarantine art, diverting art's radical energy and medial powers into the ultimate service of an anthropocentric modernist regime, which Bruno Latour declared back in 1993 to be ultimately bankrupt. So why do we continue to inhabit structures that reproduce the separation between culture and nature, art and life? What or who is keeping nature out? Whilst revisiting Franke's argument, my focus here is on the materiality and the ecology of the boundary making practices which separate art from a broader, more than human sphere. I'll be speaking through the lens of my own ethnographic engagement with Rob, who works in pest control at the Slade School of Art. The Slade is full of artworks at all stages of production, and the building, which dates from 1871, is particularly porous to pest species. As Rob says, there are so many holes in the Slade, it's like a honeycomb. The art school plays host to unwelcome populations of cockroaches, rats, foxes, and most troublesome, mice. And I should also say at this stage that this research is inspired by the anthropologist Alfred Gell's earlier comparison of artworks and traps. And whilst the research that I'm sharing today is attempting to ground Gell's earlier comparison in an ethnographic context, I've also been working with the fictional exhibition that he proposed in his essay from 1996 titled Vogel's Net Traps as Artworks and Artworks as Traps. And a virtual rendering of that exhibition is included in the MAL exhibition, which I invite you all to take a look at your leisure. So, onwards. When I first accompanied Rob during his daytime and evening sessions setting and checking his traps, I was struck by his heightened awareness and cautious obsession with hiding them. Not primarily from the mouse's perspective as I'd expected, but from the point of view of students and staff at the Slade. The reaction of a student encountering a mouse held live, dead, or even worse, injured in a trap was something he took care to avoid at all costs. For example, this care manifested itself through Rob's extensive rearrangement of chairs in the student canteen, tipping them over to hide a number of sticky traps that he'd set up overnight. Rob walked back and forth to check from every possible perspective that his architectural intervention obscured the traps from the sightlines of passers-by who might see through the restaurant's windows. Rob's work involves the maintenance of integrated and invisible systems. His use of baiting stations rather than live or snap traps at Slade extends the same logic of avoiding human attention. After consuming bait, mice tend to retreat to their burrows, often inside walls or under floorboards to die. Rob considered this trapping method to be a slow and unpleasant means of dispatching mice, but he favoured the use of baiting stations due to their lack of spectacle from a human perspective. Rob's attentiveness to sightlines resonates with concerns around exhibition invigilation within the Slade itself. Whilst a group of PhD students were planning the art exhibition Sharing Borders, a discussion took place around who might enter the exhibition space and from where. Primary concern was not for the artworks on view, but questions of access and security, and specifically the positioning of student invigilators and their lines of sight. This attention to surveillance and the role of the invigilator in the art space reflects a distrust in the unpredictable behaviour of outsiders. This systematic approach to observing and managing visiting art viewers' behaviour mirrors Rob's attention to pests, but his approach to managing the attention of humans is quite different. Rob's traps are not made to pop out against a neutral ground like works of gallery art, but rather to sink into their surrounding environment, and the creativity of his job lies in how he arranges and tends to them. I continued to bug Rob, who seemed happy to have the company, hanging out during his longer, later shifts and learning as much as I could about UCL's hidden architecture and the animals who make their home in its honeycomb structure. The rent-a-kill snap traps that Rob uses are pre-purchased plastic devices which obscure an internal mechanism consisting of 2 snap trap platforms. The mundane, boxy appearance of these traps functions as its own kind of camouflage. Their ambiguity leads them to be treated as if they harmonise with their surroundings. Like the sticky traps that Rob set in the canteen, these boxed-in spring traps are carefully positioned with double concern for the conscious and unconscious behaviours of both humans and mice. Rob has an intuitive knowledge of where mice are likely to be found. He also monitors their activity by paying close attention to the sensory markers that would normally escape human attention. Hidden things including smear marks, urine prints, footprints, tail prints, and smell. This knowledge manifests through sustained focus and a mood of awareness established over time. Rob told me that his sense of smell has dramatically improved since he started working in pest control. He also employs specific aesthetic techniques to track rats and mice, for instance, using a fluorescent dust or gel which he places around the edge of a mouse hole. The fluorescence attaches to their tiny rodent feet and rubs off on the floor when they run. The mice leave invisible traces, which can only be seen with the use of a special UV torch. Less direct methods of tracking involve using bait containing red or blue dye, which produces multicolored droppings. These in turn signify the type of bait that's been eaten, where, and by whom. Learning to trap mice involves both thinking like a mouse and imagining the world from the position of a trap, and oscillating between these 2 perspectives until the right situation presents itself. For example, the entrance of a trap must never face into a corner or at right angles to the wall. Instead, placed in parallel to a wall along which mice are known to run, the trap is oriented with as long a runway as possible leading to its entrance to maximize the likelihood of catch. As regards humans, a trap must never be set next to a fire escape or anywhere else that could cause a trip hazard, and nor should it be put in the way of any activity that might cause it to be moved. And this is important because mice have something called neophobia, which means they're scared of foreign objects. So it would take up to several weeks before a trap would sink back in again and begin to do its work. Traps and baiting stations are therefore best situated in the non-sites or odd lots around architectural follies, near corners or under ledges, which are anyway the favoured haunts of mice. The internal structure of Rob's traps also reflects these same architectural principles. The forms of attention that funnel into the setting of a trap are further honed and focused within the hidden interior of the trap itself. And this is where Rob became critical of the pre-bought snap trap, because in his opinion, its walls are too low in relation to the ceiling, and the trap's moulded shell is made of one piece of plastic, which doesn't lend itself to easy adjustment. This could cause a mouse to squeeze over a wall and trigger the spring from an erratic direction, resulting in a less precise kill. Rob's criticism can be read as a problem with hylomorphic form, or what Simondon calls hypertely, the imposition of a fixed form upon a structure which works best in dynamic relationship with its surroundings. As Anderson remarks, the design of the trap then, rather than emerging from a pre-formulated plan, can be understood as an improvisational construction that can only ever work if placed within the right spot of a particular place, and if the agency and perception of multiple sentient beings are taken into account. Improving on these traps then would mean A, tailoring them even more precisely to merge with or respond to their environment, and B, increasing their precision to guide a mouse to its fate with architectural lines that mirror most precisely the animal's intuitive passage. How do you explain it? Rob mused from the mouse's perspective. It's comfortable. Rob's engagement with smell, moisture, and near invisible traces of activity contrast with the aesthetic practices that fold into creating a cleansed and neutral environment for exhibiting art. Before our Sharing Borders exhibition, our group decided to clean the Slade Research Centre and repaint its walls and floor in white and grey, effectively sterilising the space of any prior activity and removing the residual traces of a more nuanced sensory landscape. Attending to the gallery by cleaning it before installing work is both a sign of professionalism and a mechanism for focusing a viewer's attention on works of visual art. A clean space helps artworks to pop out and compete for viewer's attention. But that's not to suggest that neutralising art space like this is itself an ethically neutral move. The artificial sterility of the White Wall Gallery ultimately foregrounds, objectifies, and elevates the value of the artworks on display. Anselm Franco refers to the art institution as a magic circle whose most noble modern mission is to purify mediation and mediality as a formula for progress. The freeing of a figure or an artwork from its ground, the gallery's architecture, through our ritual preparation of the gallery space before sharing borders, evoked these modernist ideals, which feel particularly incongruous and anachronistic in relation to the ideas and discourses explored within our weekly Slade PhD forum. Artists on the Slade PhD are more likely to draw from post-humanist lineages, including what's become known as the animal turn in art. Dusk, a practice-based PhD student with whom I had this conversation, is exemplary in this sense. Her thesis work consisted of a pigeon feeding station on the roof of the Slade, a defiant act of productive institutional critique, as she described it. But there's irony here. Not only is Dusk's work on the roof as inaccessible and invisible to human viewership as Rob's deliberately disguised traps, her critique, which involves luring pigeons in with food, impacts most directly on Rob, whose energies, despite their shared interest in the life worlds of critters, are diametrically opposed to her own, because his job is to scare the pigeons away. In order to engage with beyond human subjects, or pigeon kin, as she calls them, Dusk's artwork compromises the work of the single practitioner at Slade, with whom her own practice has the most in common, and whose work, like hers, is already displaced and marginalized in relation to the broader institutional structures that nonetheless support it. T.J. Damos points out that an engagement with ecology has largely been absent from modernism and its histories. Franca agrees that the social nature of relations between people and their environments is permanently being eclipsed, made to disappear as if by a sleight of hand. At Slade, an acceptance of the separateness of nature, evident in the reproduction of modernist gallery infrastructure and the ongoing banishment of mice, pigeons, and environmentally engaged artists onto the roof, leads me to wonder if art is in some ways boxed in by the institutional boxing out of the ecologies that surround it. Rob is employed to do this dirty work of boxing out nature from the art school, but his sleight of hand and forensic attention to the attention of others means that he'll never be caught. A successfully set trap or baiting station draws upon knowledges of animal perception and behavior in order to use a mouse's tendencies and energy quite literally against itself. Alfred Gell describes the trap as a surrogate hunter which does its owner's hunting for him. It also persuades an animal to bring about its own downfall, minimizing the energy exerted by the trapper in a quasi-magical way. Gell describes magic as the ideal technology, affecting change through zero exertion. Trapping arouses suspicion through its ability to coax unforeseen effects from mundane materials, subverting the visible and measurable production of economic value. It involves the literally unsettling ability to create something new from what's at hand in the environment.
I'm only got 2 minutes.
Okay, getting there. Traps themselves embody this negative contour of work in their literal form, and through their unnerving ability to coax effects from the environment, rather than imposing effects on it by the application of force alone. The trapper's craft is performed in order to free gallery art from traces of beyond human life and time, creating the conditions that undergird the magic circle of art. And there were moments when Rob himself seemed haunted or hunted by the nature of his job and the circumstances that had brought him to work in pest control. By Rob's own analysis, this made him tough, but he remained empathically attuned to the mice, mindful of their suffering, and therefore critical of any imprecision or oversight in the design of the trapping devices he pre-purchased for use. The tragic narrative of hubris, nemesis, and catastrophe that Gell describes as the time structure of traps rings true. The magic economy of this threefold maneuver, predicting the actions of an animal, modeling these actions and cajoling it into arresting itself, seems key to the attentional landscape of trapping, and arguably also to the workings of art. We're not doing the work, confirms Bob. The mice are actually doing the work for us, same as rats are doing the work for us. All we're really doing is placing, and the mice are doing the work. To conclude, my apprenticeship to Rob gave me new ways of seeing and sensing architectures and conventions that I inhabit on a daily basis as an artist. The institutionalized treatment of artworks as figures against a neutral ground in the gallery space obscures a world of relations that go into producing this artificial neutrality in the first place. This includes Rob's labor, his traps, his own human presence, and the presence of mice, all of whom are made to recede into the background milieu in service of maintaining a magic circle of art, within which artworks themselves can then be made to pop out to the viewer. Rob's traps can therefore be seen as a frontier technology that undermine species difference on a micro level whilst acting in the service of maintaining anthropocentric distinctions between culture and nature on a structural level. Moreover, this labour is distributed. Mice themselves do much of the work, just as the viewers of art inadvertently consume and reproduce the bankrupt institutional conditions that continue to re-erect borders despite artists' own efforts to share and overcome them. Last slide.
That's perfect. Oh my God.
Last slide. It is precisely the, may I?
Go on, go for it.
It's precisely the recursive production of a reversible figure and ground where we can exchange between two perspectives, writes Anselm Franca. But in order to see art, he continues, one of these perspectives must recede. Attending to Rob's practice, an anthropology of other animals, enacts this shifting focus from the figure to the ground that supports it. But more than this, it reveals a different mode of attentive attunement, one that's capable of flicker-fast shifts in perceptual focus between figure and ground, and between human and non-human modes of attention, held within one frame. Perhaps perceiving both at once is a trick we ought to practice, the sensitive awareness and sleight of hand that's not only needed to set the good trap, but also to escape one. Thank you.